From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The new House Special Committee on Competition with China holds its first hearing in what seems to be a rare bipartisan undertaking in Washington these days. What does Chairman Michael Gallagher have in store, and what does this portend for the changing public perceptions about China and for the agenda of the 2024 presidential candidates? Plus, two Democratic senators defect their colleagues to join Republicans to overturn a Biden Labor Department rule on investing based on so-called ESG rules, environment, social, and governance criteria. This is likely to be President Biden's first veto. So what happened there? Joe Sternberg is with me here. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal opinion page, and Joe is one of my colleagues, as is Alicia Finley, who's also here. Alicia and Joe, welcome. Let's talk first about the ESG rule, something of a surprise that after the House passed a Congressional Review Act resolution to overturn the Labor Department rule that went to the Senate, and it only needs a 51-vote majority to pass under the Congressional Review Act rule. And, of course, the Democrats hold a majority in the Senate, but Joe Manchin of West Virginia, John Tester of Montana say they will join the Republicans to overturn the rule, and that means it would go to the president's desk, and he has to decide whether to sign it and rebuke his Labor Department or veto it. So, Alicia, tell us first, what did this rule say? What does it stipulate?
So this rule actually kind of overhauls and reverses a rule that was promulgated by the Trump Labor Department, Eugene Scalia, that would require asset managers to place the pecuniary interests of plan participants, workers, or retirees above anything else. This was really the Trump rule, really just clarified what's already required under the Employee Retirement Income Security Act that requires, this is actually in the text, that plan sponsors act solely in the interests of the participants and beneficiaries.
Yeah, just let me clarify something, Alicia. So you're talking about the Scalia rule. The Trump rule said, look, you have to maintain your focus on shareholder returns, right?
Right. Or in this case, the participants and the beneficiaries, the retirees and the workers, because it was a Labor Department rule, it would apply specifically to
Pension funds and retirement plans.
exactly,
Okay.
multi-employer or 401ks.
Okay, so that was promulgated in the Trump administration. That prevailed as guidance and regulation. Enter Biden Labor Department. What did the Biden rule do?
So it reversed the Scalia, the Trump rule. And it put forth a more nebulous standard that allowed plan sponsors under a fiduciary rule to consider other factors, ESG factors in particular, environmental, social, governance, broad range of factors. And these could include climate, labor organizing, worker diversity. It eliminated specifically the requirement that there must be a material effect of these factors on a company or the returns.
So this is introducing political factors into investment decisions, it seems to me, right?
Right. And it would give them the BlackRocks of the world and other asset managers, even the union multi-employer plans, legal cover to do so. Because there's a huge liability risk under the 1974 ERISA were they to do so otherwise, were they to prioritize some of these other factors like climate in their investment decisions. So this would essentially provide them legal cover to do so.
It's a really important point. What it means is that under the classic rules of ERISA, if you decided, I'm going to take that pension fund and I'm going to put it into one of my pet political causes, and you didn't do well, you could be sued by the pensioners and others for not getting adequate returns. This is basically Labor Department cover that says, yeah, you can do this and you have some protection from suits.
Right. So all that they need to merely state is that this factor, whether it be climate, companies' labor policies, is in some way relevant to the risk and return calculation, which is, again, a very expansive standard that would essentially allow these retirement sponsors to use political considerations however they want.
Yeah, very broad definition here of ESG. And Joe, the backlash is fascinating. 2 or 3 years ago, and I have to give Alicia credit for this in particular, she started noticing this and writing about maybe even much longer than 3 or 4 years, 4 or 5, going back to when ESG first emerged as a political and a financial cause. picked up by Larry Fink at BlackRock and a variety of other folks, and was a real trend, has been a real trend in finance. Thus, the interest of the politicians to get on board. And yet, here we are in the Biden administration, and Republicans take the House and they pass a resolution to repeal it. And then a couple of Democrats get on board. How did that happen?
Well, I don't think anyone should pretend to be surprised that ESG investing has ended up being this politically controversial over the past couple of years. If you kind of understand the broader context here, I think Alicia is absolutely right to talk about this in terms of climate, which I think is one of the big policy priorities of the BlackRocks of the world, the big asset managers who are most excited about ESG investing here. The specific problem that they need to solve, that the climate left needs to solve, is that the transition to net zero is going to be astronomically expensive, and it has turned out to be politically impossible to get taxpayers enthused about paying for all of that. So, that's how you end up with things like the outcome of one of these COP summits in Glasgow a couple of years ago, where they were going to try to mobilize $130 trillion in investment for climate goals from the private sector. And ESG investing was going to be one of the mechanisms to do that. Well, I mean, think about this. If the problem is that you can't get taxpayers to do it because it turns out that that is going to be politically toxic for a variety of reasons in a variety of different countries, why would we think that it is going to be any more popular when you are asking people to essentially gamble with their own pension money? And so I think that that really is where this is run aground. I think it is because voters and the politicians who represent them are figuring out that this is an attempt to dragoon pension savers in the private sector into paying for things that taxpayers didn't want to pay for directly.
Right. And the COP summit, of course, is the climate summit that now we seem to have one of these every year. So the political backlash is fascinating. State attorneys general in Republican leaning states, many of them have tried to block their state treasuries and pension funds from investing in companies that do invest on ESG criteria. But in the Senate, Alicia, you have John Tester and Joe Manchin saying they'll join Republicans. So this is likely to pass. Before we get to what Biden will do, don't mean to be cynical here, but John Tester and Joe Manchin are both up for re-election in 2024. And it seems to me that likely here is that they are buying some political protection, some political insulation here by saying, see, we're voting against my party on this. And even though it's not really a high-risk vote for them from the left, because they assume, I think, that Joe Biden will veto this and therefore the rule will continue to hold.
Right. So Biden has already, promised to veto it. He issued a veto threat the other day. So I think this was a smart political move by Tester and Manchin. I'm actually surprised some other Democrats didn't jump on board too. I think that Schumer essentially gave some of them a pass. And that's what the reporting suggests, is that Schumer didn't really push very hard. I mean, he did write an op-ed in our paper, tried to defend the rule, which I thought was very misleading arguments. But I think a lot of the Democrats in the Senate, or some that are up for re-election, really need to try to distance themselves from the Biden agenda and progressivist agenda, especially on these ESG factors, the climate, some of the social, the woke issues. And I think this is a way for Tester and Manchin in particular to do so. Again, it also puts other potentially vulnerable Senate Democrats on defense, and they may have to explain their vote on this issue and other Congressional Review Act resolutions that House Democrats are planning to pass and Senate Republicans. And you only need one senator to bring up a resolution under the Congressional Review Act. So you could actually see more of such resolutions that try to overturn Biden rules come up and put, again, these senators on defense.
Right. House Republicans are going to try to pass those resolutions. House Democrats will be opposed. One of those coming up, the waters of the U.S. rule regulation, highly restrictive on use of waterways by American citizens. And Joe Manchin's already signaled he's likely to vote against that as well.